Hey, this is Martha DeGrasse here again for the Wi-Fi Alliance and the Signal podcast. Today in our podcast feed, we have a bonus episode. Kevin Robinson, president and CEO of the Wi-Fi Alliance, was recently featured on Sparring Partners with Monica Paolini. They discussed the importance of Wi-Fi and 6 gigahertz to support residential broadband and fiber to the home. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sparring Partners. Today, we are talking about Wi-Fi again. And there's a lot of Wi-Fi podcasts, and there is one thing that since Wi-Fi takes so much of our traffic. However, we don't talk much about Wi-Fi, and yet there is so many exciting things going on, and some that are exciting but also a little bit concerning, so to say. And 6 gigahertz is one of them. 6 gigahertz is a new band. It's huge, and it's really great for Wi-Fi because it creates a lot of it gives Wi-Fi much more capacity, which is something that Wi-Fi needs, despite being very efficient in the way it uses spectrum. However, not everything is perfect. We had a lot of good progress and success. However, in many places, we're not there yet, and there is a push towards making it more to reserve part of the bands for operators, for cellular operators. So today I have the pleasure of having Kevin Robinson. He is the president and the CEO of the Wi-Fi Alliance to talk to me and to us. And Kevin has been at the Wi-Fi Alliance for I don't know how long. I've known Kevin forever, so he will tell us. He will tell us, and we're gonna talk and give you an update of what's going on. So, Kevin, thanks for being with us today. And why don't you give us a little bit of introductions and maybe uncover the mystery of how long have you been at the Wi-Fi
Sure,
Alliance?
sure. Well, it's great to be here, Monica. And I know we've been chatting for so many years. It feels like ages. But so I'm Kevin Robinson. I'm the CEO of Wi-Fi Alliance. I want to say I'm coming up on 17 years now, I think, at the Alliance, but all various kind of
Congratulations.
roles in the organization. Initially more on the marketing, strategy and product side, and ultimately moving on to the CEO role, going on about three years now. That seems like ages also, but it's been an absolutely phenomenal experience, and I think one of the best things about being at the Alliance is you really get to work in a company and an organization with a technology that has real world impact on pretty much everybody, right? So it's a technology that my mom is positively impacted by, my kids are positively impacted by, right? And so and I think that's really what makes it so fulfilling. For those that aren't maybe familiar with Wi-Fi Alliance is the worldwide network of companies that brought you Wi-Fi, made up of more than 900 companies, kind of the who's who in the technology space. Everything from kind of the upstream technology, kind of core technology developers, the silicon vendors, et cetera, all the way down to device manufacturers and service providers and everything in between, right? So again, it's a very vibrant ecosystem, a lot of different players all over the globe. I mean, we have a global membership, and all of us come together with this one mission of making Wi-Fi great, right? Making sure that your Wi-Fi equipments can work well together regardless of who you buy it from. And we do that through something called Wi-Fi Certified, which has been around for more than 25 years. But even though we're such a mature technology, there's a ton of innovation still happening in the Wi-Fi space. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we kind of talk about what's happening with 6 gigahertz and new generations of Wi-Fi. But anyway, that's a little bit about the Alliance and myself, and just really excited to be here and talk about my favorite subject, Wi-Fi.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I started working on Wi-Fi before it was even called Wi-Fi. So that's like quite a long time. But to your point about the success of Wi-Fi, and this was a recent podcast with our mutual friend Tiago at
Mhm.
the WBA. What I realize is that a lot of people now, they don't talk about their broadband connection. They talk about their Wi-Fi.
Mhm.
So which is good and bad. It's good because they obviously associate that, but then if there is a problem, it's the Wi-Fi. It's
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
they don't even know what broadband. Like if you're a guest somewhere or whatever, you know that you have Wi-Fi.
Mhm.
What happens beyond that, it doesn't matter. In the same way that you have a cell phone, you have 4G, 5G. You don't know what happens after the
Right.
tower, after the antenna. That is really, I think, it's just the clear sign of the success of Wi-Fi. And as you say,
Yeah.
your mom loves it.
Yeah.
Everybody, it's just like there might be. It's also true that a lot of people complain about it in the same way that people complain about the weather. I think, like,
Exactly.
okay,
It's almost
sure,
like it's like small talk at a
yeah,
party.
yeah,
You can
yeah,
talk about the weather, you can talk about Wi-Fi, right? But I think it is a testament just to how central Wi-Fi has become to people's everyday lives, and it's everything from how you live, how you play, how you do your work, how calm. We'll probably get into that a little bit with the six
yeah,
gigahertz pieces. Wi-Fi fuels commerce, right? That is the
yeah,
way packages get to your doorstep, right? It's the way fulfillment centers, all this stuff is commerce runs on Wi-Fi. And so, yeah, it's really amazing. And Wi-Fi has just become synonymous with the internet, period.
yes.
And that's just how a lot of people look at it. Again, it's a testament to how important it is. And it really highlights why the work we do at the Alliance is so important because we want Wi-Fi to continue to be that critical resource for everybody. And for that to happen, it needs spectrum, right? And that's really kind of where the 6 gigahertz story comes in is it's 6 gigahertz is an essential ingredient to the future of Wi-Fi if we wanted to continue to provide all these benefits globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you look at it, like if we don't put in 6 gigahertz in the picture, which in a lot of countries is not available yet, or not used as extensively as it can and will.
Mhm.
Um, it's just amazing what Wi-Fi can do with relatively small spectrum because the spectrum we use is so intense. So the efficiency is amazing in terms of what can you do with 1 megahertz of spectrum. Which is not to say that cellular is inefficient, it's just a completely different
Mhm.
model. However, as you scale up what you do with Wi-Fi, and as you say, it's so crucial for everything, you do need more spectrum. I mean, there's no question about it. And 6 gigahertz is actually perfect because you don't actually have, I mean, in fact, the fact that you don't have wide range is actually good because it also means less interference and more
Mhm.
reuse.
Yeah, it's unfortunate in a way that
Mhm.
Wi-Fi has done so much with
Mhm.
so little spectrum for 25, more than 25 years, right? That unlike maybe some other industries where there's this a very kind of repetitive process of there's a new generation of the technology,
You
there's
need
new
more.
spectrum that you go pursue as part of enabling that technology, and so it goes, right? 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G in the cellular world. Wi-Fi has been pretty quiet about asking for spectrum because we just kept delivering higher performance with what we had. And so people weren't always used to thinking about, oh, there needs to be a spectrum pipeline for unlicensed as well. And that's really, I think, why, in a way, it has been a bit of an obstacle to us because a lot of policymakers were not used to just having that be part of their thinking, particularly around spectrum policy. But that's changing now, right? Because we have simulations and research and things, for example, that we've done that was looking at let's just go to a typical European MDU, so dense apartment condo type living situation. And Europe, of course, they have these important objectives around gigabit access everywhere, right? Their digital networks initiatives. Well, it's one thing to get fiber into that building and to get gigabit access to every single apartment,
Yeah.
but that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good when you got to get it to the device. And so the simulations we were doing said, what happens if we only have the lower part of the band, which I'm sure many of your listeners already know that, in Europe, unlike the US, we have the lower half of the 6 gigahertz band has been allocated for unlicensed use, which Wi-Fi uses. And the fact is, with only that lower half of the band, your probability of delivering gigabit internet to every dwelling is very low. I want to say it's below 50% probability. So you're not going to get to gigabit, even just gigabit, forget like the
Yes.
higher multi-gigabit that Wi-Fi can deliver. You're paying for high-speed broadband, you're paying
Mhm.
for advanced Wi-Fi equipment, and you're not getting what you're paying for. You're
Yeah.
paying for the latest smartphone that has those capabilities in it. You paid for it. It's in there. It's not turned
Yeah.
on because the regulations in your area in Europe don't support it. And that's where it's like kind of a consumer thing now because you're paying for all this stuff and you're not getting what you pay for.
Yeah, actually, did you see the recent Ookla data? And this was for the US. So,
Mhm.
but still, a lot of people do not have 6 gigahertz either in their devices or their access point. And so, you pay for all this very fast connection to your home, and then Wi-Fi is the bottleneck. Not
Mhm.
because Wi-Fi is or has to be the bottleneck, but
Mhm.
because it's not managed properly, because you're not using 6 gigahertz. So, but we have to sort of be careful of how, we actually use it because, up to recently, you kind of, you have your phone, you have, whatever. But now, the number of devices, in fact, most people wouldn't even know how many devices they have in their home. I
Mhm.
didn't. I mean, every time I tried to count them, I would just run out of like, oh yeah, and then there is that thing. There's just so many. I mean, okay, maybe I'm a little bit on the exception, but a lot of people have a lot of Wi-Fi. They don't even know it's Wi-Fi,
Mhm.
because you don't need to know. You just
Right, right. Yep.
or it could be Bluetooth, but it's using the same band. So, okay, so what's up with the 6 gigahertz? So you mentioned that in Europe, it's a mixed. You may use some, but not all the band, and the US you can use all the band. But okay, why don't you give us like an update of what's going on with 6 gigahertz?
Well, I think that the first thing to start off with is 6 gigahertz is a success, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure we're going to get into maybe some of the obstacles that the industry and we might see going forward. But before we even get into that, it's important to understand 6 gigahertz and the forward-thinking policies in countries like the US, South Korea, et cetera, where they've made the full 1200 megahertz available. We're delivering incredible benefits. We're now more than, I think, 5,000 different unique products. So this is not obviously unit shipments, but
Yeah.
5,000 products. That would be like, the iPhone would be one of those. But over 5,000 that are available today that make use of the 6 gigahertz band. About 1,200 of those are Wi-Fi 7 products, so the latest generation of Wi-Fi. And I want to say in 2025, we're going to ship a little bit over 500 million devices, 6 gigahertz devices,
Mhm.
just this year. So it has been an incredible success. We're now seeing additional rules coming out around very low power devices. So this is what's going to allow you to do things like have AR, VR headsets tethered to your smartphone, right? So
Mhm.
you now have that. It could be mobile broadband. And right, as we get into this, I also want to be careful because sometimes this comes across as a Wi-Fi versus cellular. The
Mhm.
reality is, even though we're talking about maybe some of the same spectrum and it sets up that adversarial relationship in a way, cellular and Wi-Fi are incredibly essential complements to one
Yeah.
another. Wi-Fi is not successful without really good cellular. Cellular is
Yeah.
not successful without really good Wi-Fi. And so sometimes we'll talk even about like 5G use cases or 6G use cases. They talk a lot about AR, VR. Okay, well, the way they are going to deliver that is they're going to have very high performance mobile broadband coming to a phone. And then you're going to have very high performance Wi-Fi linking that
Yeah.
phone to the device, right? That's how it's going to happen, period. When
Yeah.
you're indoors, it is going to be a Wi-Fi connection that ultimately goes to that device.
Hey, may
So,
I ask you a question here? It's
yeah,
actually, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Cellular and Wi-Fi is like two people with different, you're two friends with different personality.
yeah.
And you want to have one friend? No, why? Why should you have only one friend? Two, or well, hopefully more than two. But anyway, but when we talk about like the sort of indoor 6 gigahertz, isn't more like Bluetooth domain rather than cellular? So is Wi-Fi kind of competing or an alternative to Bluetooth?
Well, I'd say let's say in a typical connected home environment, it is going to be a collection of technologies, right? You're going to have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Thread, Z-Wave. There's all manner of unlicensed technologies. But I think it's a key piece. Indoors is generally owned by unlicensed. I say owned
Yeah.
by meaning the use cases
Yeah.
are generally served by unlicensed. And you're not going to be putting SIM cards into your TV. You're not going to be putting SIM cards into your washer and dryer, right? All of these devices are going to be using generally unlicensed technology, and Wi-Fi is by and large the dominant indoor technology, and really the only game in town when it comes to 6 gigahertz and high performance connectivity. You're going to have smatterings of private licensed, whether that's CBRS or something like that for indoor, very specialized use cases. Yes, there's a place for all of that. But the vast majority, and we often talk about more than half of all internet traffic goes over Wi-Fi, and it's upwards of, like 80% plus of indoor
Yeah.
traffic is over Wi-Fi.
And only 80% of mobile phones
Yeah,
traffic,
on
which is
exactly
like
that. And that's even on a mobile device that has
yeah,
a SIM card, 80%
yeah,
plus. And there are a number of operators, particularly in the US, cable operators like Comcast, who they have strategic advantages because they're able to get even up approaching
yeah,
90%
yeah.
of their
In
devices.
fact, it's hard to get off Wi-Fi because sometimes there are situations in which you do not want to be on Wi-Fi.
Right.
Like you go in and out of your home,
Mhm.
whatever. It's actually hard to get off Wi-Fi sometimes.
Mhm.
So you have the up. You guys are just too successful. I mean, well, you guys, Wi-Fi is almost too successful that you can't get out of it sometimes.
Mhm.
So anyway, but
So yeah,
it's
so a lot of really good, I
yeah,
mean, a lot
yeah.
of really good things happening. Continued innovation. We're looking at higher power levels for VLP, et cetera. We also, of course, in the U.S. have a very good uh, track record in momentum around standard power, and that's what gets you 6 gigahertz outdoors. Very important thing of like open air stadiums, et cetera. You need that spectrum for these dense deployments. So we already talked about the number of operators there supporting AFC, which is something that is necessary to enable standard power.
Okay,
But also,
could you, I'm going to interrupt you again.
please go ahead.
Could you just explain, because, okay, so most people would know about that, but what about what's the deal with the standard power? Can you just buy the 6 gigahertz access point and be happy with it and be done with it?
If you're a consumer, so the consumer doesn't have to really worry about, let's say, getting some type of additional service to make 6 gigahertz standard power work. But for those who may not know, 6 gigahertz, um, you have different flavors of 6 gigahertz and Wi-Fi. One of them is low power indoor, and these are devices that are limited to indoor operation and they operate at lower powers than Wi-Fi typically operates at. So that what that means is the ranges are going to be less. You may not get as high performance, particularly for a handset that is communicating back to the access point or the traffic coming from the handset or another Wi-Fi device, client device in the home to that access point because they're operating at lower powers and they're more, just the form factors and things like that. They
It's like
tend to be a little bit
sensors and things like that.
right, all of that. But really, for 6 gigahertz, predominantly going to be your productivity laptops, smartphones, et cetera. Now, standard power allows you to operate in 6 gigahertz at, like sounds like standard or typical Wi-Fi power levels, which gives you much higher performance. In order to do that, because Wi-Fi is sharing the spectrum with incumbents or other people who have licensed operations in those bands, they're authorized in those bands, then there's this database, something called an automated frequency coordination database that determines where those incumbents are, says, okay, we don't want to interfere with them. So it does these advanced calculations. And essentially, what it spits out to the access point is these are the channels you can operate in at whatever power levels are authorized. That's what allows standard power 6 gigahertz to happen. Again, it gets you higher performance indoors, but it's required for any type of outdoor operation. So think on a campus, like I said, an open air stadium, et cetera, they need to use this. So the US has it, Canada has it. They've got a robust ecosystem, multiple operators, commercial enterprises are offering this service, makes it cost effective. You're going to see it in everyday consumer, retail and service provider routers. You see it on the enterprise side for sure. And it's just going to become a standard part of Wi-Fi. Now, the models that we're seeing in the US and Canada, and particularly the US, I think are good models that the UK and others in Europe should be looking at, because the more that we can have one common approach to doing standard power, the less expensive it's going to be for the industry and the faster you can get the benefits, because there's not specialized engineering on a country by country basis. All of that just adds friction.
Yeah. But actually, with 6 gigahertz, it's going to be a little bit more of an issue because every country is, well, not every country, well, but there is more difference.
Mm,
Although, if you remember, even 2.4 back in the day had a very different regulation. So, like, I can't remember, I think it was France, where you couldn't use 2.4 outdoors. There was just
mm,
some kind of crazy, I can't remember now the details. But then eventually everybody's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Let's just
mm.
all do the same thing. But like, for instance, China, it's all the 6 gigahertz is licensed. I guess that doesn't, it's not so much of a problem because then if you're in China, you just don't use it. It's kind of easy. It might be more complicated if it's like the band is split, but it's split in different ways.
Mhm.
And,
It becomes an issue and complication for the device vendors who are making these
yeah.
products. They're gonna hide all this complexity from the user. But it is going to impact the experience that you get on those devices. So, perfect example, Wi-Fi Alliance recently did a trial in Thailand, and this was a teaching hospital where they were teaching kind of basic anatomy to medical students. So you're in there, no kidding, we're doing this trial, and like there's cadavers, right? I mean, it is a working medical school. And we were looking at, in the specific use case they had is, rather than using human cadavers to teach anatomy, what if they can do things like virtual reality headsets, right? And so now you have, instead of 10 people around a cadaver, you have an entire class who's able to see as if they're at the front row instead of people kind of crowding around and trying to see. And that's what they were using this for. And so we demonstrated, okay, well, if you have half the band, 500 megahertz, what is the experience you're likely to get? And if you have the full band, what is the experience you're likely to get? And this included things like demos, but also we ran this during the semester. So again, this was students in, like
Yeah,
in
real
the
thing.
throes of going through medical school. And what we found is the difference between the two is we had a 2x increase in data throughput, which you would expect, right? Twice the spectrum. But then we had a 5x reduction in latency. And this is an important point for people because increasingly, a lot of the applications that you're seeing running over Wi-Fi, the performance is generally there, right? For data throughputs, we've done an incredible job, but they're going to be more and more dependent on latencies that are low to give the experience. So a 5x reduction in latency in the dense deployment scenarios. And then finally, we did this more qualitative survey to each of the students, like, hey, how would you rate your experience? And on those scores, there was a 3x increase in the qualitative measures of user experience when you had the band. So there's very real impacts in real use cases being used today. These are not, the fantasy, hey, let's talk about what's possible in 10 years. This is something that these are applications that are available today that those students are using, and it made a very real impact.
No, absolutely. And yeah, and I think that the point you make about latency is really important. And this is not because some people say, well, with Wi-Fi, you don't have, you don't manage access. It's a listen before you talk, whatever. But in general, that's true for cellular too. Capacity gives you indirectly better, I mean, more capacity gives you better latency
Mhm.
because you have less congestion in
Mhm.
the same way that the bigger roads allow you to go faster, but also reduces traffic. I mean, it's the same thing. So even though capacity in itself doesn't guarantee lower latency, it helps a lot, no
It
matter what you
absolutely
do.
does. Yeah, it absolutely does. And so the way you see this shake out is the spectrum gives you all those improvements I just talked about.
Yeah.
Then you overlay on top of that things like Wi-Fi 7,
Yes.
moving into Wi-Fi 8, but Wi-Fi 7 specifically with like multi-link operation where you're able to time slice and look at what is available. And now because you have this spectrum diversity, you can pretty well guarantee
Yes.
very, very low latencies. Like 99
Yeah.
percentile, you're getting sub, 20 millisecond
Yeah.
latencies, things like that. So that gets really exciting because again, That
Yeah.
is what is required for these applications nowadays.
Yeah, and yeah, so all this kind of additional functionality works as long as you have enough spectrum, because if you don't have enough
Yeah.
spectrum, then you're obviously going to be constrained that way.
Right.
Okay,
Because
so
Wi-Fi
yeah.
7 was designed
Mhm.
with the expectation that 6 gigahertz would be available.
Yes.
Right. So these countries that are not, let's say, moving forward on this, prudent 6 gigahertz policy, maybe they don't fully comprehend like all of the downstream impacts they're going to have. But the reality is, the latest generations of Wi-Fi are not going to work as well in those
Yeah.
countries as they do in countries that do have that policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, okay, now US has always been cited as, and it is, a great example for 6 gigahertz. We have all the 6 gigahertz available for Wi-Fi. We're very happy. That was like basically the first big
Mhm.
market to go with it. And yeah, it seems like that might be under threat. What's happening? Which is kind of really unprecedented. I mean, it's just like, what? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to be mindful of that situations can change, and obviously, Wi-Fi Alliance and the industry are very monitoring this very carefully. So, what I'm sure you're referring to is recent legislation in the United States called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, recently passed. Is one thing, the main thing it did is restore the FCC's auction authority. And then along with that, it directed the FCC to find 800 megahertz of spectrum for auction. And so Wi-Fi was not explicitly protected in that or carved out as, the 6 gigahertz band was not carved out as not being appropriate for the location of that spectrum. But when you dig a little bit deeper, it's not as doom and gloom as maybe some people look at. The first key point I'll make before I kind of get into the details of what it does ask for is the deliberations on this bill prior to its passage made it very clear on the House version, recognizing the importance of maintaining the benefits and the economic competitiveness that are going to come with Wi-Fi's use in the 6 gigahertz band. And the House version was explicit, do not touch 6
Hmm.
gigahertz, right?
Hmm. Right.
Now, the Senate version and what was ultimately passed didn't have that specific language, but it still recognizes the importance of Wi-Fi. So again, we
Right.
have to be vigilant about
Mhm.
this, but I think most people really recognize the importance of Wi-Fi and are not inclined to go back to what the old state of affairs without Wi-Fi having 6 gigahertz. But essentially what it does is there's out of that 800 megahertz, 500 of it have to come from federal users. So that's not even part of the discussion. Wi-Fi is not a federal user, right? So we're not even that
Mhm.
500. At least 100, and it could be more. At least 100 has to come from the upper C band, right? So
Mhm.
that also is not going to impact Wi-Fi. And then whatever remaining piece, so let's say, so we have what, 500, at least 100, and then the remaining 200 would need to come from federal, non-federal use. And that's the one I think people are worried about. But there's a lot of other places where that could come from, right? And so we're obviously engaged in that, but it's something we have to be vigilant of. But I also don't think it's a sky is falling or something is going to happen immediately.
Mhm.
People get the importance of Wi-Fi, and we're certainly going to be making sure that we're communicating that.
But on the other hand, mobile operators have been pretty vocal all along, and some organizations on the cellular side that they want to have licensed. I personally, I mean, I sort of, they can use the 6 gigahertz band for not. I mean, it's unlicensed, so they can use it. Nobody's stopping them. Um,
Well, but not for high power. And this is kind of
no, no,
also
no, yeah,
dovetailing into
yeah,
the yeah, into the European side of things is full power IMT.
it's
You know,
different,
it's going to
but
obviously have
yeah.
an issue with Wi-Fi, but also the incumbents, and this is going to be their biggest challenge,
Yeah.
is being able to coexist with incumbents. They can't. So wherever they're going, you have to refarm that spectrum, and that's particularly problematic in Europe.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that's the thing is that at that kind of frequency, I think that, well, anyway, that's my personal view, is that it should be unlicensed in lower power, because then you have more frequency reuse.
Mhm.
It's a much better, much more efficient use of the spectrum, even if it's not Wi-Fi. I guess that's
Mhm.
my personal take.
Mhm.
Anyway, so there is no so there is no immediate threat, obviously, but it is possibility. But it wouldn't be weird, because whatever usually happens, spectrum allocation, you can't just take spectrum away, because there's a lot of people that just use it. You just can't, the same with CBRS and whatever. You can't just make changes like that. It's just like not standard practice.
It does. I think anything that creates uncertainty in the market is problematic. Uncertainty gets people nervous about making additional investments, right? It's never good. I think one of the key things for regulators is steady, right? Steady as she goes, provide that certainty. People can be confident that decisions that were made will, that they can rely upon those for years because they're making, investment decisions and product roadmaps that have long-term implications. And so I think that's, certainly I think the FCC understands that and they understand the value of Wi-Fi and will be very engaged in kind of helping move this conversation forward as they do look to um, achieve the objectives of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which does need to find licensed spectrum because we talked about that complement. The licensed community does need spectrum. We get it. We
Yeah,
agree with
yeah,
that.
well,
But don't undermine Wi-Fi in doing it. That's the key point.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely right. You need to do both, but at the same time, there's just so much spectrum there, and you need to make sure you have enough for unlicensed.
Hmm.
Even though it doesn't give you any revenue in terms of licensing, but there is a clear economic value. We want to prop up the economy, while you need to allow people to get the connectivity that they need. So,
Hmm.
how do you see the sort of actually above 6 gigahertz? Because there is that's also, I mean, some of it might be licensed, but anything that you see,
I think the most promising right now would be in the 7125 to 7250, so just adjacent to the upper six the Wi-Fi is in today. That would allow us to get an additional 320 megahertz channel. So that is valuable, and I think you see a number of a number of leaders in the industry are really pushing for
Mhm.
that. But I think that's the most, particularly in the US, that's the most likely near term place the Wi-Fi would go is into 7125 to 7250.
I'm gonna ask it because I'm a big 6 gigahertz supporter. I think that there is a lot of opportunity there, but doesn't seem to be a whole lot of activity in the
I'm sorry, in which
60.
one? In
60.
oh, 60. Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with millimeter wave. I think one of the to the point of look at what Wi-Fi has been able to do with what we have.
Yeah.
And 6 gigahertz, I think, gives us a lot of runway. I think there will be use cases for millimeter wave, absolutely, but for just more
Yeah.
typical networking applications, I think 6 gigahertz is the growth area for us right now.
No, absolutely. And I guess that until you run out of spectrum, why not use 6 gigahertz? Why would you bother go into, let's say you have an enterprise, or whatever you have, or at home. If you have enough spectrum with 6 gigahertz, you don't need to go to 60.
Right, but there
Unless,
are use
maybe
cases.
for
Think of
some,
like
yeah,
wireless
yeah, some,
tethering,
yeah,
like docking stations, all that stuff totally
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
But for general
Yeah,
networking,
yeah, for general, yeah. What you'd have at home on to get your TV connected to your Wi-Fi, say. You
mhm.
just don't, once you get to that point, then we'll have 60. Yeah. So, final opportunity for you to tell us what's new, what's coming up, what is it we should pay attention to.
Sure. So we've talked a bit about the US. So I think the really the most critical near-term conversation is happening in Europe. So both in the UK with Ofcom as
Yes.
well as the European Union. And this is again where you kind of have this conflict between, or I say inconsistency between goals around delivering, you know, gigabit or more connectivity, but not having policies that make spectrum available to deliver that through Wi-Fi. Um, Europe has the lower half of the band, so the deliberations are what happens with the upper part of the band. The RSPG has a number of options, or 5 options they're looking at, and really the first one and the fifth one are the most relevant. I think the most likely. The first one is 1200 megahertz. Have it allocated for unlicensed. Wi-Fi gets full 1200 along with other technologies, just like we have in the U.S. That is by far the Wi-Fi industry's preferred approach. The fifth option is a prioritized split, and this is where, um, and this is why I think it's compelling. Is at least in the near term, it allows Wi-Fi to make use of the full 1200 megahertz, while they still figure out if it's even possible to put IMT into the upper part of the band, because there's all these challenges around incumbents. It's not consistent from country to country. So what would likely happen is even if they put IMT there in the upper part of the band, you may only get select countries that can move the incumbents out and allocate it. So
Right.
this fragmentation, one, and it goes against all of the one market initiatives that the EU is trying to do, right? It reduces scale, it makes it more costly, and at the end of the day, you may not even get universal IMT up in the upper part of the band. So they have to figure all that out. But Wi-Fi can use it today. So there are mechanisms where they would have a prioritized split where IMT maybe has a prioritized allocation in the upper part of the band, but Wi-Fi can use it today. If cellular ultimately moves in, Wi-Fi would detect the cellular and then it would vacate those channels. And so we think that is an acceptable approach to us, and we can support finding ways to make that happen because it gets us into the band,
Mhm.
even though our the optimal allocation would be all for
Yeah.
Wi-Fi, but we can live with the other one and we can help make that happen.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like CBRS, but in reverse. Because see, with CBRS in the US, a lot of people say, well, might as well use 6 gigahertz
Mhm.
because it's easier and you have much more bandwidth. But this one would be like adding CBR and CBRS kind of sharing on top of what's already there. So I would imagine that, yeah, you could support it because, in many places it doesn't really matter. You just be using Wi-Fi because there is no
Right.
cellular.
Exactly.
So
Indoors,
it's like, yeah,
you're
let
using
them
Wi-Fi
have it.
anyway.
They're not coming here,
Yep.
I mean, in a way, it would be almost interesting as a proof of concept to say, you see, you have access and yet you don't use it.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. So the main thing
Because
is
I
it
think
delivers.
that's what's going to happen in most places, quite honestly.
It is. It is. And it delivers immediate benefits.
Yeah,
And in many places, that's going to be
what
where we
people
ultimately
want.
land in the long term as well. So we might as well get there now.
Yeah.
And I think the other key piece is a lot of other countries are looking to Europe for signals of where they might ultimately go. So that's why the conversations happening in Europe are so important, is they're going to really set the stage, and I think for other regions that look at the US and European models and ultimately pick one of those models.
Absolutely. So we'll keep an eye on that.
We
So
will
Kevin,
for sure.
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Now we know everything there is to know, and we know that we shouldn't be too scared about losing 6 gigahertz in the US, and I hope it stays that way.
We will be doing everything we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. But it's always a pleasure to be with you, Monica.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for listening to Sparring Partners, and do subscribe to the feed if you like it. Thank you so much.